Federal prosecutors met today with former lawyer Michael Cohen again, which adds to the 50 hours he spent with them already. And that apparently has Donald Trump nervous. The president going out of his way to accuse Cohen of lying under oath when he said Trump directed him to pay Stormy Daniels. Now, this is actually a telling attack, because with other people cooperating with the feds, Trump has distanced himself, saying someone's a coffee boy or he barely knows Paul Manafort. But Trump thinks Cohen apparently knows enough that the content of his testimony must be discredited. Trump also suggesting the man that he credited as a lawyer for over a decade is now a PR person who only did small legal work. Now, Cohen did do PR for Trump, but note that his guilty plea wasn't about PR. It was about the legal work negotiating that gag order contract for Stormy Daniels, which Cohen paid for in coordination with and direction of a candidate for office, which we know was Donald Trump. And he admitted he was the David used in that contract and admitted he made the payments.
Did you know about the payments?
Later on, I knew. Later on. Did they come out of the campaign? They didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me.
Or take another lawyer who does legal and PR work for Trump, admitting the same thing.
That was money that was paid by his lawyer. The president reimbursed that over a period of several months.
Donny Deutsch is a friend of Michael Cohen's and an MSNBC contributor. Thanks for being here.
Thanks. What happened to Rudy Giuliani, by the way? Where'd he go?
What do you mean?
He just disappeared.
You mean, why is he not on television?
He's nowhere. He just, he's in a basement somewhere.
I think they're using the pre-election quiet period to keep Rudy quiet.
Hello, man. Good to see you.
It's good to see you. You've spoken to Michael Cohen and you've spoken about this on air. He's back with the feds today. What do you see as the important part of this story?
The important part of the story is that Donald Trump is frightened, and that's obvious. You know, there's something that Donald Trump may have forgotten about. There's an actual audio tape of him really telling Michael what to do, directing Michael. But this is Donald Trump. The sky is not blue, it's green. It's just, there's no reality to realness. Michael is very clear in where he is right now. Michael wants to be on the right side of history. Michael is doing everything he can to help the Mueller investigation. What is also an outright lie, because I dealt with Trump, the Trump Organization, Michael, for 10 years through business, through television. Michael was Donald's right-hand man.
Sure.
Other than his 3 children, and probably more so than Eric, because Eric was much younger, there was never an interaction I had with Donald about anything where Michael was not involved. Michael was a consigliere, he was his advisor, he was a lawyer. So to say he was his PR man is an out-and-out lie. Donald understands that right now, and I do not know this, but this is not from Michael, it's from me, he's in there probably corroborating every serious issue because Michael was there front and center. And so at this point, Donald needs to do everything he can to discredit him, but it doesn't matter. Facts are facts, tapes are tapes, and this is just lie number 4,740 for the president.
Well, it's good that you have a count off the top of your head.
Okay. The Washington Post does it. I read the Washington Post, and that's what happens.
Did Michael Cohen go to Prague for Trump?
No, by the way, he has said no. I have to believe that. I think it's been, they've looked at it every which way. I am not, with Michael all the time, but what Michael has told me and everybody else, and it's
now you just went from sounding like a TV guest to like you're in a deposition.
Well, you're asking me.
He has said that.
I don't think he.
My understanding of the.
My understanding, I don't believe he did. He says he has, and I have no,
Let me put it this way, and I'm not giving you a hard time.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do that.
That's okay.
Do you think that Michael Cohen knows things that relate to alleged collusion?
Yes. Yes. I think that it would be hard for Michael to be in the position he's in and not understand. I think, look, Donald Trump knows what Michael Cohen did, where he was, how he knew. So that's why he's frightened. So I believe if there was collusion, I think Michael would know about it. He's spending a lot of time with Mueller and in a very cooperating way. So I do not know this from Michael, but I would be shocked if at the end of the day we are not looking at both obstruction of justice and collusion from 40 different angles. And I'm sure Michael's in a position to help out if that's the case.
Which is interesting coming from you, given the unique perch that you have. Now, as you know, if you have nothing to hide, you shouldn't have a problem talking to former federal prosecutor Dan Goldman, who's here to help interrogate you.
I'm on the other side of this table here, and so I'm.
You have nothing to hide, right? You're free to leave at any time.
I was nowhere near.
But if you
the
do,
bar that
you'd
night,
be in trouble.
Yes.
What questions are on your mind for Michael Cohen or Donny?
Well, I think there are a lot of questions for Michael Cohen, and what's interesting is what we learned today, that it sounds like it was the Southern District of New York prosecutors who were meeting with Michael Cohen. And what seems to be happening here is that Cohen is splitting time. He's spending a fair amount of time with Bob Mueller and going through the collusion and maybe some of the obstruction of justice, and maybe more, because there's a lot that occurred that Michael Cohen was involved with after the election. But then he's also spending time with the Southern District of New York, which is not going to be involved in the collusion aspect, but may very well be involved in exactly what Donny was talking about, Michael's role as sort of a consigliere for the Trump organization. And you can bet that the prosecutors from the Southern District are downloading Michael Cohen about everything that he knows about anything related, anything nefarious related to the Trump organization.
And his utility to both of those probes reduces his jail time.
It likely will. He does not yet have a cooperation agreement, although that could follow. He pled guilty just straight up to the crimes that he was charged with, including, as you mentioned, the Stormy Daniels and the Karen McDougal payments. But he is cooperating about all sorts of other things. He may ultimately have to plead guilty to more crimes if he was involved in more. He may not. But regardless, this cooperation, this meeting, this providing evidence will be helpful to reduce his sentence, regardless of whether he gets an agreement or not.
Another question just about Michael's state of mind, not necessarily what he knows, is he's publicly now embraced the Democratic Party going into the midterms. Is that really the best idea? Wouldn't it be better for him to just back off of all politics and say he's going to be factual and leave it at that?
You know, let me answer it two ways. Let me answer it the literal way. It's probably best, but you have to understand this is a guy that every day is getting punched and can't really punch back, you know, and it's just, I think, an emotional way of him saying, you know what, I'm not on that side. I may have started out there. I made a big mistake. I went to work for
What
this
is he
guy.
trying to say, though? Is he trying to say that he basically does not think Donald Trump belongs in office and that's why he's with the Democrats?
He is absolutely, look, a lot of the country feels wrong. He probably feels more wrong than anybody because he was loyal to this man. He was loyal to this man for a long time. He feels violated. He feels the country's been violated. He wants to make a statement that beyond obviously doing what he needs to do, it's right for himself and his family, he wants to see this country in a different place.
So what does it say to you that the man who spent, as you put it, this much time doing everything with Donald Trump, knows him so well, knows him behind the scenes, thinks it's imperative to get him out of the White House?
He has seen a transition. You know, I remember a real turning point for him was after the Helsinki meeting. So he always knew Donald was a certain kind of guy, but he was very loyal to him and he believed in him. He has seen a very different guy in the last 18 months. You know, he said to me many times, because at the beginning I said, Michael, how could you be loyal to this? He goes, this is not the same guy. This is a different guy. So I don't think he ever thought he was working for Choir Boy, but he has seen a very different morphing into a very different character that I think has given him a real permission to kind of go into a different place.
Well, as Dan Goldman will tell you, you don't have to stay, and that's what makes sure that we're not on the wrong side of a custodial interrogation situation. But I'd love for you to come back later in the show and talk about ads, since you're such an ad guy.
Ari, whatever you want me to do, I will do.
How do you feel about
I'm cooperating.
How do you feel about the custodial interrogation joke?
I think it was very good, and I think three viewers got it.
Yeah,
but I'm with you.
Well,
I'm with you.
The fact that you thought it was good and it was silent tells you what a low bar us lawyers have for humor. But if you're watching this show, you know that already. Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.